Okay, in this unit, we're going to talk about methods and cognitive neuroscience. The first part will be about methods. Again, just to remind you, the methods is coming from chapter 1, cognitive neuroscience is coming from chapter 2. And in this particular unit, we've divided that into 4.1 is about methods, and 4.2 is about cognitive neuroscience, a specific kind of methods. Um, so what we'll do in this video is um, these are the outcomes for this part 1 4.1, which is again divided into two videos, A and B, and you can see that in this particular video we'll answer, these would be these questions we'll answer, or we'll look at these outcomes. Number one, how are the information processing and cognitive science approaches similar and different? Then we'll talk about how can we measure the mental process objectively, because we can't see them. If you remember, that's the basic debate, right? Cognitive science, cognitive psychology assumes that mental processes exist and we can objectively study them. The question is, how can we do that? Then before we get to different ways of measuring mental processes, there are two important analogies we need to go over that we'll do in this particular video. Okay, coming to the first objective, we can talk about how the information processing approach and cognitive science approach are different or similar. Now, they are different in these three ways. Number one, information processing approach utilizes very limited number of methodologies, usually accuracy and reaction time, whereas cognitive science approach, it adapts multiple methodologies. And we'll talk about what these are in the next video, actually in the same video, I'm sorry. Then what is the other thing that is different is the background of the scientists. The background of scientists, according to cognitive science approach, is multidisciplinary. So there are philosophers, linguists, computer scientists, psychologists, and neuroscientists. So that's what makes it more uh, multidisciplinary. Now, because the multiple methodologies are utilized, you'll have different aspects of human mind that you look into, like the biological aspect of it, the physiological aspect of it, the computing aspects of it. We learn different aspects of mental processes. That is another difference between information processing and a cognitive science approach. Cognitive science examines various aspects of human mind, and the logic here is that when you have a multiple perspectives on understanding human mind, then when you put these things together, then you have a bigger picture, a complete picture of how the mind works. This brings us to the second outcome for this video, which is how can we measure mental processes? Remember, cognitive psychology basic assumption is that we can objectively study mental processes. How can we measure those? We can't see them. So this is about the logic of cognitive psychology. So one way to look at it is this beautiful analogy given by Gernsbacher, the factory analogy. Now, according to this analogy, just imagine that there is a factory and we don't know what's happening in the factory, but we do know, sorry, that what goes into the factory. We also know what comes out of the factory, but we exactly don't know what happens inside the factory. Now the question is, how can we know what's happening inside? Now, the analogy here is to understand what's happening in our mind. It's a mental process, right? The question is, what is happening in our mind? Factory is like your mind, and what is happening? We know what goes into our mind, what comes out of our mind. What goes in your mind is the stimulus given to our mind, and what comes out is the response given by the mind. The question is, how do we know what happens in the mind? So I want you to pause here for a second. In fact, I'm going to stop here and go to the next slide. Before that, I want you to think about how can you infer about something that you can't see. So according to this analogy then, well, we can't see what's happening in the factory, but we can actually see what goes in and what comes out. So if we observe what goes in and we observe what comes out, in fact, if you manipulate what goes into the factory and then see what is happening to different aspects of what is coming out. In other words, if you manipulate the input and measure the output, then you can make inferences about what might be happening. You can apply the same thing to the human mind and say that, well, we don't know what exactly is happening, but we can make inferences about what might be happening by manipulating what goes in and measuring what happens to what comes out. And at this point, I want you to understand, like, remember, just think of this as x and y axis a graph. X axis is about what you're manipulating the input. Y axis is about what you're measuring the output. And when you manipulate the input and see how that influences the output, then you can find the relationship between the output and the input, which will give you a better understanding. Again, we don't know exactly what happens, but we can make inferences about what might be happening inside. That's how we make inferences. That's why, if you remember from the very first video, the big picture, we defined mental process um, as a mental activity, and we also said it's an inferred mental activity. Inferred in the sense that we can't see it, we can only make inference about what might be happening. And this is a result of making or understanding the relationship between what goes in and what comes out. And specifically by controlling what goes in, by manipulating what goes in, and measuring what comes out. Now, when you say measuring what comes out, all right. The question is, what aspects of those can you measure? Well, we manipulate the IV, the input into the mind, and you measure the dV, and the dV you're measuring or what's coming out. Remember, it's like IV is the independent variable, dV is the dependent variable. So you're manipulating independent variable and measuring the dependent variable, and by finding the relationship between these two, you're making inference about multiple mental processes. And so, what aspects of the output can you measure? Well, you can measure such aspects as the response time or the reaction time, the accuracy of the product that's coming out or the response. And there are several other methods, and we'll talk about that later, just to give you a sense like that you can measure different aspects of the output or the DV by manipulating the input. And the most commonly employed methodologies are the reaction time and accuracy, specific to strict information processing approach. And I have several others here referring to the fact that cognitive science has added several other methodologies that can help us understand the output, understand the mental process by examining other aspects of the mental process or other aspects of the output. Okay, so coming to the next outcome, we talked about how these are different and similar in a very general sense. Again, we'll talk about how specifically these are different in the next video. Then we said, how can we measure mental process subjectively? We talked about the factory analogy. Now, before we talk about what different measures there are of measuring mental processes, we said we need to look at the two important analogies, and that's what we'll do now. So the first of the two analogies we'll talk about is the channel capacity analogy. Now, if you remember during World War II, when psychologists and several other researchers and scientists are trying to help the soldiers on the field, the behaviorists had no way of actually thinking about or no way of providing any concrete measures to help soldiers because they needed help with um, abstract constructs related to mental processes like thinking, attention, and things like those. And there's nothing like that in the behaviorism, or there was nothing like that in the behaviorism, because they only studied observable behavior, right? At that point, we also discussed in the history part of the unit that um, um, at this time, the psychologists, they worked with um, other scientists from other fields, like um, communication engineers and computer scientists. And these two analogies are actually specific to what they have learned from those scientists. The first analogy is a channel capacity analogy, which is a direct result of psychologists working with um, and learning about working with the communication engineers and learning about this construct that we'll talk about now. And in the next analogy, which is about the computer science, again is a result of the partly the World War II and also the the discovery or the invention of computers. So coming to the channel capacity analogy, now according to communication engineers are not okay. Just to give you a sense, communication engineers are interested in communication, and we're talking about people who create cell phones or phones. Now, according to this analogy, or according to this, the communication engineers, they use the word channel. A channel here refers to any device, any device or any physical structure that can receive, transfer, or transmit, send, receive, and process information. So your cell phone can receive information, it can process information, and it can send information. So that's a channel. So also, psychologists have learned to apply this analogy to human mind and say, oh, okay, human mind is a channel too. It has the capacity to receive, process, and send information. And if you think about the cell phones, the cell phones now are like 4G or LTE, and before there were 3G, and before that it was 2G, 1G. What are these things? Can you think about it? Like, what exactly do these things mean? Well, they refer to the channel capacity. Is the capacity of the device to the amount of information it can receive, process, or send at any given point of time. And the higher the channel capacity, the more the information it can receive, process, and send at any given point of time. Now, if you ever used the 1G or 2G phones before, you can see how slow it was. It was difficult to do, talk to someone and also do something else on the phone. Now things have changed with the increased channel capacity of our cell phones, where you can actually do multiple things, watch a video and also play a game and do multiple things, because the capacity is more. So same thing can be applied to human mind, in the sense that it has a capacity, channel capacity, and that's nothing but the attentional resource. The problem with the human mind is that the channel capacity is very limited. In other words, the attentional resources are very limited. So I just wanted to keep this analogy in mind, and we'll refer to this analogy as we go. Now, coming to the second analogy, which is the computer analogy, and according to this, our human brain is like the hardware of a computer, and whatever is happening in the brain, which is the mental process or the mind, can be compared to the software or the operating system. So human mind is compared to the program that runs the computer, and the computer itself is compared to the brain. Now, according to this analogy, humans are and computers are similar in the sense that they are information processing systems. And if you remember, when we talked about language, we use the term symbols, right? We said that that a symbol is something that represents something else in the external world, and we also said that any system that acts intelligently does so because it can store symbols and it can manipulate symbols. So information processing systems like humans and computers, these are symbol storing and symbol manipulating systems. So human, just like a computer works, just like a computer works because there are programs written, so that computer knows how exactly to do a specific task when it is given to you. For instance, if you open the application, which is nothing but a program, like a Word document, it's an application, it's a program, and this has specific instructions about what to do when a specific input is given, so that when you click on the letter C, the computers have no idea what letter C is. They store the information that is given to them in binary format, zeros and ones. Um, so, so Word document or PowerPoint or PDF, or take anything that you can work on your computer as a program, as a set of instructions given to the computer when a specific set of input is provided, then it gives out a specific output. In that sense, a program is a sequence of instructions for the machine to specifically manipulate the symbols. It's like an algorithm, a set of instructions. So, an algorithm is a set of instructions. So, also human mind, that's the analogy. So, our brain is like the hardware, the actual system, and the mental processes are the software, the set of instructions that are coded in our brain, and that's how our mind works. Our mind works based on the programs. In other words, there is an algorithm in our mind. There's an architecture in our mind. An algorithm of computers programming would be then similar to the algorithm of mind. So cognitive algorithms, that's what we're interested in studying. Cognitive architecture is another term we use. They all refer to a set of processes that happen in our mind, which is nothing but mental process. So we assume that there is a uh, uh, processes, set of instructions set, and that's how our mind works. And we're trying to figure out these principles of these algorithm, the cognitive architecture. Okay, this brings us to the last objective, which is how our mental process measured? What are different aspects of the output that we measure? Um, Now, if you remember, in the last video we talked about the reaction time, the time of the output, right, and the accuracy, the quality of the output. And we said there are several others. These several others are specific to cognitive science. Um, these are verbal protocols, neurophysiological, and programming. Now, what is verbal protocols? I can keep in mind that these are not these are different aspects. By gathering information about the output, which is a result of a mental process, in various ways, we can get multiple a better picture of what might be happening in the mind. So a verbal protocol here is where people or participants are asked to read out loud their thoughts. Now, one example I would give is when I was a grad student, I was working on this project of creating an online um, reading comprehension test. And in this task, participants would be presented with a paragraph. The only thing was that the paragraphs are presented as stories, basically, just like your reading comprehension test you might have taken, but these are presented one sentence at a time. And at specific points in the text, participants would be asked, what are you thinking now? Now, by examining the content of their verbal protocols, they're thinking out loud, right? We can make inferences about the mental process. Like, for instance, what you're thinking now, if they just present the information presented in this sentence they are reading, then we can make some inferences about their reading. If they are talking about ideas presented a few passages ago, and those are causally related to what they're reading now, then that gives a better understanding of, oh, this is a good reader, he's making connections or she's making connections. Again, verbal protocol or think out loud protocols, participants when they are asked what you're thinking now, or similar prompt. The second, the other way of measuring mental processes, the neurophysiological. Again, this is specific to cognitive neuroscience, as we said, or the neuroscience, where you're looking at the neuroimaging, you're looking at the chemical changes, you're looking at the biological and physiological changes in the brain associated with specific mental processes. So this gives us idea about not only how, but also where things are happening. And the last one is the computer programming. Now here, this is a purely result of the computer scientists. And the idea here is that if you remember the analogy, we said that a software is, or a program is nothing but a set of instructions given. So in artificial intelligence, field, what they do is try to create a system, a program that would simulate human behavior. So they'll write a program, then compare that program with the actual behavioral data collected from humans. Okay, let's say this is a task. Now, based on the theories, you create a program and say, okay, this is how they will behave, and you have this program. Then you actually run that experiment and provide the same information, then you have the results. Then you compare and say, well, the behavioral data that we have collected from this exam or from this particular experiment, does it fit the model we have predicted based on the existing theories? So there are different these are different ways of measuring mental processes. Again, we don't need to know specifics of these things. I just wanted to give you an idea that now it's not just reaction time and accuracy, which were the only two primarily with the strict information processing approach, but with the cognitive science approach, we have multiple ways of measuring mental processes. Now, just to talk about two measures, the reaction time or the response time and the accuracy. Let's see what kind of information do these measures give us about mental processes. The first one we'll talk about is the reaction time or the response time. What do you think the response time informs us about mental processes? Before you answer this question, I just want you to think about, try to answer this question as quickly as you can. What is 2 times 3? Okay, good. What is 7 times 2? That's good. Now, what is 23 times 49? Okay, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to answer this question even without a pen or pencil and paper. But the idea is that you can see that the time you're taking to respond to the first two questions is different from the time you're taking to respond to the next one because it is a difficult one. The idea is that by looking at the reaction time or the response time to the stimulus, we can make inferences about the mental processes our mind goes through. Things such as the complexity of mental processes. Is it a simple mental process with only one step, maybe, or is it a complex mental process with several steps to it? Also, mental process gives us an indication, this measure of reaction time gives that real-time information. We assume here that mental processes occur in real time. Um, and according to Donders, he proposed that actually the response time, the speed of mental process, the response time gives information about the speed of the mental process. The quicker it is, the lower, the smaller the reaction time, the faster a mental process is. The slower it is, or the more the reaction time, the slower the mental process is. So mental process then gives us information about the speed. The reaction time gives us information about the speed of the mental process. Now, to kind of give you an understanding of what do you mean by speed and what do you mean by complexity of mental processes, we're going to have a quick task in the next slide. So the task is called the Stroop effect. What you're supposed to do in the next slide is you'll be provided with several columns, usually like 4 columns of these words. You have to read these words in a particular column and move on to the next column. But again, you're not reading the words. You have to read only the color of the word. For instance, you can say this is red. You can't say this is blue. You have to say it's orange. You should not read it as green, but you should say yellow. This is green, this is blue, this is orange, and this is red. But you'll go in this fashion, one column at a time. So when I show you this task, I want you to quickly, as quickly as you can, try to go through this column one at a time and see if it was easy or hard to read the colors as opposed to reading the words. I'm going to pause here and we'll go to the next slide. Okay, let's see how you do. Quickly go through this in this direction. How was it? How you student? Let me try. So this is blue, red, red, blue. Sorry, black, red, blue, black, blue, blue. Sorry, red. This is blue, black. Do you see how you slow down? Well, you slow down at specific points. Again, this is and this is not the right place to talk about the. It takes lot of time, but just to give you an idea that you slow down at specific points. In other words, it's harder to read the color of the words. It's easier to read the word itself. Why? You can think about it. You can pause the video. Well, the reason is that yes, you're right. We've been learning and we are used to reading words. We are not used to reading colors, right? So reading words requires fewer attentional resources. That's why it's faster. Reading the color, on the other hand, requires you to consciously try to suppress um, your natural instinct of reading the word and read the color. In other words, it requires more attentional resources. So you can see how you can make better understanding of the complexity of mental process depending on the attentional resources required by um, looking just at the reaction time or the response time. So StruPerfect demonstrates how we can get a better idea of the complexity of a mental process involved in a task um, with the help of response times. Okay, let's see the utility, the kind of information you can gather from a measure like accuracy. Now for this, I want you to do this task. Now you drop your pen or pencil, book, anything. I just want you to follow these instructions and in the next slide, you'll see a list of words. I want you to try to remember as many words as you can. Please do not try to use any mnemonics like visuals, pictures, or things like that. Just try to repeat these words in your head, maybe. That's what we usually do. Then try to remember as many words as you can. And don't write them down. Don't use any technique. And let's see what happens so we can talk about the accuracy measures importance. Are you ready? Okay, I'm going to stop here and we'll proceed from the next video. Sorry, next slide. Okay, here you go. These are the list of words I want you to remember without writing them down or without doing anything with them. Okay, now I want you to quickly recall. Take a piece of paper and pen and write down as many words as you can remember in any order you can. You can pause the video here and I'll see you in the next slide. Okay. I hope you paused and recorded your thoughts and the accuracy. Now, how many? This is actually the list you saw before. So, how many of these words do you remember? Well, typically, the response it's like 7, 8, unless you do, or 9. Average is 7 plus or minus 2. Remember the magic number. Okay. Now here's the question: how many do you remember from this list? Okay, people typically say very few people, very few people remember information from this. What about how many of you remember red? Did you recall air, pen? What about this list? Do you recall chocolate, table, rug, balloon? Now, typically, what happens is that when participants are presented with a list of words with a clear indication of the initial and the final and the middle words in the list, you'll see what is called as serial position effect. In other words, the x-axis here, the input that was provided to you, the initial items were the primacy items, or the first items in the list. The items at the end are the end of the item list, and the items in the middle. So the position of the items would be the initial, middle, and final end of the list. And the y-axis is the percentage of words recalled, and so it's the accuracy. And if you think about it, so the higher the number, higher the accuracy. For the primacy words, or the words at the beginning, the accuracy is higher. For the words that were presented at the end of the list, the accuracy was higher, right? Both are higher. But when you look at the words presented in the middle, the accuracy drops. What might be the reason then? Why do you recall words at the end and in the beginning of a list more than items in the middle? This is the difference in accuracy, right? Well, one explanation is that, again, it will make more sense when we talk about the memory. But one thing is that if you're actually just rehearsing this list of words over and over again, the primacy effect is the fact that your accuracy is higher for initial items when compared to the intermediate items. Recency effect is your accuracy is higher for the most recent or the end of the list items. So this is called primacy effect, the fact, and this is called the recency effect. The fact that initial items are remembered better than the middle items is primacy effect, and the fact that the recent items are remembered better than the intermediate items is the recency effect. And these two effects together are referred to as the serial position effect. Now, why serial position effect? Let's look at the primacy effect. The reason for primacy effect, one explanation is that these items are provided at the beginning of the list, so you had enough time to rehearse them, enough time to move these items from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. Okay, so when you recall the items in the initial list or the beginning of the list, they come from your long-term memory. Coming to the recent items, you didn't have any time. You didn't have time to actually rehearse these particular words, but they are still fresh in your short-term memory. So that's why you're able to recall them better than the items in the middle. Whereas the items in the middle, you didn't have enough time, nor are they fresh in your short-term memory. That's why your memory is drops when it comes to the intermediate items. So remember the accuracy by looking at the accuracy difference between these three different uh, uh, positions of a list of words, you can make inferences about the source of the information. The recall information of the initial words is coming from long-term memory. The recall information of the words in the recency effect is because it's coming from the short-term memory. So the accuracy gives us information about the source of the recall information. Okay, so look at these four different outcomes, how IP and CS approaches are similar and different, how can we measure mental process objectively, the two important analogies and the different ways of measuring mental processes, and specifically we looked at the accuracy and reaction time measures importance and what it might give us information about specific mental process in a given task. Now, this is the end of this particular video where we are in 4.1 approaches. In fact, this is 4.1a. We're talking about the basics. In the next video, we'll talk about 4.1b, where we specifically look at in this video we talked about the differences between these two approaches at a very general level. In the next video we'll talk about what specific differences there are between information processing and cognitive science approaches. So stay tuned and have fun learning.